Okay, welcome to part 2. So we've got to the conflict, the inciting incident of this story. So let's see what happens as the action begins to rise. And you might already be able to predict what our climax, the most dramatic part of our story, will be. Norma sat on her bed and took off her slippers. Maybe it's some kind of psychological research. Arthur shrugged. Could be. Maybe some eccentric millionaire is doing it? Maybe. Wouldn't you like to know? Arthur shook his head. Why? Because it's immoral, he told her. Norma slid beneath the covers. Well, I think it's intriguing, she said. Arthur turned off the lamp and leaned over to kiss her. Good night, he said. Good night. She patted his back. Norma closed her eyes. $50,000, she thought. Okay, so Arthur has described the pressing of this button and the outcome as immoral. Okay, and that means it's morally unacceptable. It doesn't conform to a moral standard. It's not okay. So why might Arthur suggest it would be immoral to press the button? And which word best applies to his character? Would it be virtue or vice? And why? So I'd like you to pause the video and complete those 2 questions now. Okay, so this might lead us back then to recapping our 7 deadly sins. Well done if you said that virtue was really the right word to apply to Arthur. He seems to be a virtuous character because what he's doing is the right thing. It's good, it's morally correct. Norma, on the other hand, is really tempted by this button. So we want to think about what the button could be a symbol of. So 2 things. Number 1, as quickly as you can you write down as many of the 7 deadly sins as you can recall? And 2, can you answer the questions at the bottom? Once you've got those deadly sins, which of these might the button be symbolic of? Off you go. Okay, so just checking your list. Have you got lust, gluttony, greed, avarice, desire for money? Sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. And you might remember when we were reading the story of the necklace that the diamond necklace became symbolic of avarice and greed, but also Matilda's pride, her vanity really, that led to their financial ruin and downfall. So I'd like you to do the same if you haven't already for the button. What could it be a symbol of? And how do we know this? If you've already done that, you might want to go a bit further and explain what might be suggested about human nature through the character of Norma, who is so intrigued and tempted by the proposition suggested by Mr. Stewart. Off you go. So hopefully you have discussed here that the button can be seen as a symbol of greed and avarice. The temptation is too great for Norma when she hears the financial reward, $50,000. It's clearly there in her mind. She can't stop thinking about it. And even though her husband counters this sort of greed with his morals, with the difference between right and wrong, for him, he thinks, this is completely immoral. It's unacceptable to even consider pressing this button, which would lead to the death of a stranger. For him, that's a disgusting, it's a kind of repulsive and appalling idea. But for her, the money, the financial gain for them is still something that weighs heavily on her mind. Okay, let's see what she'll do next. In the morning, as she left the apartment, Norma saw the card halves on the table. Impulsively, she dropped them into her purse. She locked the front door and joined Arthur in the elevator. While she was on her coffee break, she took the card halves from her purse, held the torn edges together. Only Mr. Stewart's name and telephone number were printed on the card. After lunch, she took the card halves from her purse again and scotch-taped the edges together. Why am I doing this? She thought. Just before 5, she dialed the number. Good afternoon, Mr. Stewart's voice. Norma almost hung up but restrained herself. She cleared her throat. This is Mrs. Lewis, she said. Yes, Mrs. Lewis. Mr. Stewart sounded pleased. I'm curious. That's natural, Mr. Stewart said. Not that I believe a word of what you told us. Oh, it's quite authentic, Mr. Stewart answered. Well, whatever, Norma swallowed. Can you see the evidence here that suggests that she is struggling, really? She seems somewhat conflicted herself in the decision that she's making. She responds on the one hand impulsively, grabbing the cards halves and putting them into her purse, but she also hesitates, questions herself. Why am I doing this? Doesn't quite want to believe what Mr. Stewart has said. So this proposal creates an internal conflict and dilemma for the character to deal with. When you said someone in the world would die, what did you mean? Exactly that, he answered. It could be anyone. All we guarantee is that you don't know them, and, of course, that you wouldn't have to watch them die. For $50,000, Norma said. Is that correct? She made a scoffing sound. Oh, that's crazy. Nonetheless, that is the proposition, Mr. Stewart said. Would you like me to return the button unit? Norma stiffened. Certainly not. And she hung up angrily. The package was left lying by the front door. Norma saw it as she left the elevator. Well, of all the nerve, she thought. She glared at the carton as she unlocked the door. I just won't take it in, she thought. She went inside and started dinner. Later, she went into the front hall. Opening the door, she picked up the package and carried it into the kitchen, leaving it on the table. She sat in the living room, looking out of the window. After a while, she went back into the kitchen to turn the cutlets in the broiler. She put the package in a bottom cabinet. She'd throw it out in the morning. Okay, so can we see here how, again, Norma is tempted by this button? Do you think she's going to throw it out in the morning or not? Okay, so I'd like us to now think about the way in which the two characters of Norma and Arthur, the way in which their reactions to the button are juxtaposed. That means that they are different to one another. You may even say opposite to one another, and placed side by side to highlight the difference. So I've got so far that Norma is curious about the proposal and Arthur is offended at the thought of killing someone. See if you can get at least two other things that show us the different ways that these characters react. Pause the video and do that now, please. Okay, now using your table, I'd like you then to develop that into some sentences that give your impression of the character and the way in which they react differently to the button. So what can we tell about Norma's character? What impressions do we get about her from her reaction? Can we suggest perhaps what might happen in the future? You may wish to think about what the button is symbolic of too. And once you've done that, can you do the same for her husband, for Arthur? What impression do we get of his character? And why might he be an important counter to Norma's greed? Pause the video and complete those now. Okay, so now would be a really good opportunity for you to share your impressions of the character. You might want to do this by turning and talking to the person next to you, or your teacher may wish to do this by pausing the video and asking for hands up. Spend a few minutes sharing your impressions and ideas about these two characters. Okay, so that is all for our reading of the story today. We're going to read the second half in tomorrow's lesson. So if you still have time left today, what I would like you to do is focus again on a bit of creative writing. We've done lots of this throughout the half term, so I know that you're really good at it now. And many times what we've done is borrowed some really excellent parts of the stories we've read to create something new. So this time, your task is to describe a mysterious package that has just arrived at a character's home. You may choose to use as much of the opening of this story as you wish, and I have actually created it as an outline there for you to fill in the gaps if you want to. Or you may wish to change it slightly. You might want to add in your own details. But I'd like you to spend at least 10 minutes crafting the opening to a story that just deals with describing a mysterious object and the way in which a character first responds to it. Okay. Pause the video, complete that for 10 minutes. And don't forget, please, that if you are working at home today, I would really like to see evidence of your work. So when you're done, please take a picture and then upload it to Show My Homework. Thanks everyone. I hope you have a lovely day.